Howdy and welcome back to my channel. If you are returning, you get an extra howdy. Switching it up a bit, I usually film in my little nook with a studio ring light, and right now I am filming with the Milwaukee 8 a.m. morning light streaming in. I wanted to just switch it up because I'm going to be talking about palettes today. NATASHA DENONA. These palettes used to be so prohibitive to me because of their price. I never thought that I wanted to afford a palette like that. I'm glad that I am able to afford this, but I didn't think that I would want to spend $129 on an eyeshadow palette. And then of course, the levy broke. I got so many more. I bought the Tropic palette, Safari palette, BIPoC palette, Sunset palette, Lila palette, Gold palette, Sunrise, Bronze palette, and then her mini Camel palette. That is 9 palettes of hers that I have owned. This is over the course of a few years, and I'll tell you which ones have survived, and I've basically depotted and repotted all of them. I also want to touch on why eyeshadow palettes come in the way that they do. Sometimes they're super curated, really clean cut, and you can understand like lightest to darkest, and you can totally see the spread of warm and cools. But so many palettes nowadays, especially the rainbow ones, they're coming in with a kaleidoscope Tetris of different colors all mixed up. And if you've always wondered why, I have a few theories. So keep on watching, and this channel is all about slowing down, looking at what we have, and turning the gaze inwards, hence slow gaze. I just turned 30 this year, and I am so much more of a maximalist, and it's because I just didn't have the money or the disposable income to pay for this kind of addiction, really. But I have some addictive behaviors with shopping, especially for shopping beauty. I'm not ashamed about it, but I am trying to work through it. And that means a lot of declutters, a lot of changing my mindset and really turning the gaze inwards. Yes, you got it. Figuring out why I'm so compulsively buying things that I want to have for my fantasy self and what makeup really means to me. I think a lot of lifestyle bloggers and minimalist bloggers that I've been following, they started off in the beauty category, and I think that really shows how beauty can be a tool to create a false sense of self, to deflect from maybe some other issues that could be worked out with different behaviors. So of course I am all about showing you my collection. I'm all about helping you make a good decision if you're thinking about some of these products or if you're just admiring or enjoying from afar. I'm gonna try to move into more content that talks about not shopping or how to talk yourself down from a purchase. If you wanted to see content like that, please let me know, especially in the comments down below, or give my videos a thumbs up. Of course, if you haven't already, I would love for you to subscribe. It really helps my little channel grow. I just hit 50 subscribers over the weekend. I'm not about the numbers, I'm just saying that sometimes it's nice to feel that people are out there and connecting with your content. Let's dive in. We're gonna go back in time. I'm starting with the gold palette from NATASHA DENONA. She's such a beauty. I actually love her foam packaging, love the perforated plastic with the names on them, and I also love that you can depot these babies so easily. Now if you're looking at this and you're like, wow, that looks pretty organized, well, it's because I tried my best to put it in a way that made the most sense to me. That's exactly what I wanted to touch on as to why makeup palettes are coming out so often now that have an array and a mirage of colors. It's because if you look at this gold palette, you can see that there are quite a few neutral tones that look very similar. I would call them different in only the undertone or the hue, the saturation, and how deep they are. Basically the same. This is probably the darkest, but we have one that's almost like a greeny yellow. We have a peachy one, an even peachier beige one. This is quite neutral, almost yellow as well, and then one that's a little browner. So I put it in a way that I could see, okay, these are kind of the most neutral, more brown. These are my light ones. Here is my true warm yellows, and here this yellow green is going to work really well with all of these other greeny blue colors. That's just how I like to lay it out, but when the palette comes, I think the blues are kind of separated. I know that this Oro shade was in the center here as the heart of the palette to basically work with any of the colors. Sometimes artists will put out colors that kind of work in segments. So if you look either this way, this way, this way, or just in quads, that will kind of create a look. I know that Huda Beauty does that a lot. I know that Tati Beauty, that's a great example of her textured neutrals palette, how she had like it gridded out and even the names spoke to their formulations and what color to expect. But nowadays you're seeing things all jumbled up. If this palette came out in this way, you would take one look at this and be like, there are 4 shades that are too similar. I'm sorry, I'm out. Or you would take a look at this and say, there's only 1 blue in here. I'm out. There are just so many similar shades, and I'm not knocking that. I actually think that these do have different finishes, they have different formulations, amount of glitter, all of that, and I understand why there are so many similar ones. Kind of. I could probably do without this shade here. Your eye is supposed to be drawn to all of the pretty pops of colors all throughout the palette. So maybe this one would be mixed up, this. They'd all be moving around in the palette. Your eye would be doing this as you're scanning it. You get excited because you can see all the possibilities. You're trying to work it out and compare, and it's supposed to bring an emotional experience to you. Looking at this might make you feel calm, but it might not make you feel so excited, and that to me is perfect marketing. NATASHA DENONA is not immune to that. For so long, I have been trying to avoid buying this palette, basically because I didn't know how to use golds on my skin tone. I thought that having such a yellowish skin tone, golds, especially ones that have a lot of bright yellow in them, would not flatter my skin tone. Boy, am I wrong. It can come down to personal preference, but I do find that I'm reaching for this a lot. I think that these shades are some of the most neutral shades, and I get the fun pops in here. If I didn't have those colors, yeah, I'm not sure if I would buy it, but if this was a 9-pan palette, stunning. I think it would outweigh a lot of the other palettes that I'm about to talk about. So this I love. It's basically intact. I just moved all of these shadows around, and I encourage you to do this if this is kind of, you're looking at this and you're like, oh, that makes a lot more sense on how I would use it, or it kind of speeds up your application process. Take a picture with the plastic on top so you could tell where they were at what point, what color they were, and then move them around. I literally took just an X-Acto blade or a box cutter, and you can get in really easily between these slats, pop them out. They're so easy to move around. That's why I love this palette. Also feels kind of indestructible. Gold is one of my top 3 favorites from her. I wanted to go into these mini or midi sizes next. We have the bronze palette, which came out very recently as well, and then this sunrise palette. I always get them mixed up between the sunset and sunrise, so I actually mixed both of these together. So let me show you the bronze first, because that one also has remained mainly intact, except that I moved it around. I think there are maybe 3 or 4 shades from the sunrise palette that I mixed in here. Most notably is this shade here. I also moved another red in here. This time I actually moved 2 very similar shades apart from each other. I think one is Silk, which is so much more vibrant than another gold that looks the same in the pan, so that I could always tell which one was Silk because they don't correspond to their names that are printed below. But I love that I can have the 9-pan palette of neutrals again, and then one red row that gives me a little bit more vibrancy, and then a cool and dark row. These two work together as almost Siamese twins because I have a very neutral one-stop shop, and then with this I have basically some of my favorite colors that I love to work with all in here. And it's just so beautiful to look at for me, especially since this palette has so many different duochromes. Let's say this one in particular, that gives the red and orange shift into a gold. I think some of these also are extremely subtle, but so gorgeous. I think this is from the bronze palette. Don't quote me on that. I will pop up a picture of both of them and how they've moved, because I figured it out. It was way too much work, but if you want to know, there you have it. Got your egg yolk, mac and cheese, Dorito colors, you got your peony, peaches, and then you have your really lovely, I want to call them Victoria shades. I don't know why, but it's oddly gender specific, but I want to call them raspberry reds, and then this one is kind of brown. So together, these are my favorite. So the top 3, right here. So the rest that I'm going to show you are a little less aesthetically pleasing because they house basically the shadows that I don't use as much. Not so much for this Lila palette, but you'll see for, let me just show you, this Tropic palette. Okay, I love the packaging, actually. I somehow love the crazy blue with the hot pink kind of Miami shade in here that's trimming it. But if you look at this, isn't that like a crazy looking, really weird neutral palette? I didn't even try to organize it well, but these are all the shades that basically I don't use. And why do I have it? I'm going to be doing a giant eyeshadow palette declutter soon, so that will have to probably go. This shade here was from the BIPoC palette, which is supposed to be this wonderful neutral palette, and it sure is. However, I just found it was either way too cool toned, like there were some shades in there that I just would never use, like this here, which is like this rhino gray. I think it was called Stone or Structure or Sculpture or something like that. Probably Sculpture. Like, it's beautiful and editorial, but in real life, I just never reached for it. I didn't know how to mix it. There was also some shades in there, especially in the warms, that were so warm. They were just clay-y, mid-toned, and very orange. And I didn't feel like I could do all of my looks with, let's say, the gold palette that had some yellows in there and some mauvey tones. And then some of the mauvey tones especially, and I'm not sure exactly which palettes these are from, they were too cool tone for me. They just seemed far too deep as well. And so these are not beginner palettes, I would say. I don't think that I would recommend them, especially the BIPoC one. I know that's highly, highly recommended, and it's still for sale, so it must be doing quite well. Sorry, I'm getting a little sweaty. These are all my graveyard colors, and I kept it in this palette. I didn't keep my Safari palette. I didn't keep my BIPoC palette. The Tropics palette has basically also gone defunct. You don't see any of the cool colors. I think the only one in there that I miss was Gusty, maybe a fake tan as well. There were some nice neutrals in there, but didn't miss the pink, didn't miss that like hot green. Neither did I miss the blues or the purple. It's so sad. It kind of shows you how many colors you get in a NATASHA Denona palette, but also how many are really nuanced and very specific to a certain color story that maybe she has in her mind for the everyday person. And I like to consider myself an everyday person, even though I'm here talking to you on YouTube. I just don't think that I need all of these shades. Same with this Sunset palette. This was the first one I bought from her, I think. Or was it the Tropic? I don't remember. But this one I'm trying to use a little bit more. I organized it in a way that it has my favorite yellow from this palette. That was the first yellow shade that I ever owned, and it blew me away. So I bought it. I do need a light color under there for it to show up. It's not like the neon brights that are out there nowadays. This came out way earlier than that rainbow resurgence, I would say. But this again has all those oranges, some really gorgeous colors here, but they're so similar. I think this black was from the BIPoC palette as well. You can tell it has kind of a different texture. It almost feels like a pressed cream, super subtle, but it's really buildable. So I don't reach for this palette because that black occurs in this as well. I consider this black extremely similar and far more wearable because it has so much red in there, it has some purples in there, and I can darken up any color and it feels way more natural than this very gray, cool toned black. If this got lost, I don't think I would repurchase it. So I only bought one mini of hers, and it was called the Camel palette. It had seemingly the right mix of darks to lights, neutrals, a shimmer in there, and it was pretty, but somehow I just didn't reach for it as much. I don't know. I have to still figure out my favorite like neutral eyeshadows and why, because it really looked great in theory, but somehow I didn't reach for it as much. Right now, it's just housing a bunch of different shades that I kind of use and kind of don't. There's no real story to this. The only reason I'm keeping this so far is because if I ever wanted to create my own 5 pans for travel. If I'm being honest with myself, I really shouldn't keep this and just invest in a magnetic palette and call it good. I don't need something so small with no mirror that could break, and you know, it's really nice and it fits everything so perfectly and I appreciate that, but I don't need it. Also would not repurchase the Camel again. And Lila or Lila has survived all of the declutters. This is probably the second or third palette I ever bought from her, despite myself, because I don't love purples, even though I think they're quite flattering on the eye. This is what I have created with the Lila palette, and this is probably my fourth favorite palette that I have from NATASHA DENONA right now, at least the way that I rejigged it. This shade here, Zena, must have been from the Tropic palette. I have this red from the Sunrise palette, and a bunch of other shades I think are just so stunning, especially how this one shifts red purple, and I have this red pink purple story here, and then this really crazy duochrome that's green and red, and this burnishing color, this really nice bronzy color, works well with this, which is a good transition shade. There's all that I need in this palette if I want a purple pink look, if I want a neutral look that has a little inner corner highlight, or something a little bit more fresh and editorial with either the red, which is one of my favorite shades, or this purple all over the lid. Previously with the Lila palette, I could look very easily punched in the face, and my dad has even told me so. He never comments on my makeup, never comments on what I'm wearing, but there was one day, I think it was right before my wedding, that I was just trying to be a little bit more bold and experimental, and he was like, "Do I need to buy you a steak for that to put over?" And I'm like, oh god, if my dad's talking to me about makeup, I took it off immediately. So there you have it. Those are my favorite eyeshadow palettes. If you want to know more, please let me know, ask below, and I'm happy to do an actual review on any of these, especially the ones that are kind of intact, like the gold palettes or these two babies here that I always hold upside down and inside out. If you're thinking about picking up any of them, I still think the bronze palette is fabulous. I don't think the range is quite as striking as, let's say, the gold palette, but the gold palette really works well with my personal skin tone. I've seen that it works quite well with others. If you're thinking about it and you love those blues, this one I can't say enough good things about. The Lila palette I really enjoyed. Again, if you know how to use purples, I say go for it as well. The Sunrise was great for the red and that yellow, but I don't think I would be purchasing it again. The Camel, see if you can see it in person. Really look into your collection to see if you have things like the Camel palette. You're like, yes, they're tried and true. These are the shades that I want, exactly the undertones that I want. Then maybe go for it. I know that's a great entry price point for NATASHA DENONA, but then the Sunrise palette, it is a shockingly gorgeous palette. I wasn't interested in her Love palette because there were too many pinks and purples, and I just don't wear those colors as much. I hope you are safe and sound wherever you are, and if you haven't already, I would love for you to consider subscribing, especially if you've made it this far into the video. I upload every single week, and I will see you again on my next video. Stay safe and vote. Adios.
Please handle this side up. You got me upside down. Should only feel this much, but in your liquid I drown.